Well, welcome. I'm delighted today to have with me on screen Father Andrew Stephen Damick. I'm sure for many of you, he needs no introduction, but for those of you who do, Father Andrew is the Chief Content Officer for Ancient Faith Ministries. And if you're anything like me, you'll be familiar with the work of Ancient Faith because of the proliferation of podcasts, of quality publications that have served really to edify many of the Orthodox faithful today and in a line of succession, really, of materials that have fed Orthodox people in the West for many years. But that said, um, the topic that we will be discussing is how it is the Orthodox Church might best deal with what has been called the convert surge with respect to Orthodoxy. And Father Andrew, before I start rambling, I just want to say welcome and thank you for the time that you're giving me today.
Thank God. I mean, it's good to see you even across the Atlantic Ocean through the magic of the internet. But yeah, it's good to be here.
Good, good. Well, of course, we'll be looking forward to another pilgrimage in just a few months now, when you're
Indeed.
coming to join me on a journey through Scotland. So there's that to look forward to. Mm.
Yep, yep, yep.
Good. So the reason I got in touch with you, and as it turned out, the topic was of immense interest to both of us, but was due to the fact that there's great conversation around the question of a convert surge in Orthodoxy. And I can attest to that surge from an anecdotal point of view in my own parish. But of course, it raises the question of what's happening across the Orthodox world in the West in particular. And I got thinking about what it is we are doing by way of mission, what it is that people are finding of interest and appeal in the Orthodox Church, and how it is incumbent on us as Orthodox Christians to make sure that when people approach us, especially from the outside, they find not only a ready welcome, but something that keeps them there. And I know when I mentioned it to you, you said absolutely that you had been thinking along similar lines. So I wonder if you just want to get us started by talking about what it is you've observed and how it is you've come to think about the current issue.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's been a few years now that I've been noticing an influx. I think it might have been 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago, that I actually wrote an article about on my blog about this increase in interest in the Orthodox Church, and this was still early in the pandemic, maybe well, not early, but I think it was maybe 2001, 2021. What year are we? um, but and then gradually over time, it started to become apparent. People started trading stories, and um, you see a buzz going on in the internet and all of this stuff. And one of the questions that of course everyone is asking is like, well, why is this happening? Why is it happening? And I've been grappling with that for a while now. And one of the things that I discovered is that by and large, as the Orthodox ask this question, we're doing so in a very insular way. We think that it's about us, that it's something particular to us. And I've even seen triumphalistic stuff, on the internet, like, look how amazing we are. All the people are coming to our churches, whatever. Um, but that doesn't really explain what's happening for multiple reasons. Number one, and I mean, this is probably most germane to our conversation today. Number one, there is not a thing that occurred suddenly in the Orthodox world about 4 years ago that suddenly attracted a bunch of new people. Like, we did not do anything. I've seen people say, oh, well, it's this or that commenter on YouTube, it's this or that book, but none of that explains the timing, because in many cases, like for instance, those, content creators online have been doing that stuff for years, and they didn't suddenly get new exposure. Um, or the ministries that people might point to have existed for years and didn't have suddenly some breakthrough. So it doesn't explain the timing. And it's also the case that, at least anecdotally, when I talk to people who have become Orthodox or become interested in becoming Orthodox in this period, they are not all mentioning some particular source that brought them in. That was their points of contact, whatever. It's extremely varied, right? And I think the reason that people will point to one thing or another is because maybe it connected with them, and then maybe everybody that they know. But this is the problem of the bubble age that we live in,
Mhm.
right? Where what is it that social media algorithms give you? They give you exactly what you want, and not much else. They know that it makes you unhappy to see things you disagree with, and so they push that down, and in the algorithm. So what I've been trying to do is to get a much broader sense of what's going on, and just in terms of cause, the only thing that makes sense that suddenly happened everywhere to everyone is the pandemic. It was a worldwide phenomenon. Obviously, it didn't hit everywhere in the same way, not just in terms of the virus itself, but the way that, local communities and governments and churches dealt with that. But nonetheless, it was a worldwide experience, and almost everybody, at least in the West, had some experience of being told to stay home. And whether they chose to do that or not, certainly a lot of people they knew stayed home. And so it affected everyone's life, right? And so, I mean, my sense is that in a long arc of disenchantment in the Western world, that we were we lost what I think of as the last enchantment, which is just people being with each other. There's something about being with other humans that has an unseen reality to it. You feel it even with just one other person, right? But certainly when it's a group of people together and you're all doing something together, like the Greeks have a term. I don't know if it's for this, but the Greeks have the term pareia, which they use that to describe the sense of family and friends being with each other and just sort of loving the experience of being with each other. There's something beyond that. There's something transcendent beyond that. And I think that what the pandemic did is it muted that considerably. And so many people then were pushed over various kinds of edges. Some of those edges were very, very dark. Like there was an increase in suicides, increase in divorces. A lot of people stopped going to church, or stopped, often their church stopped letting them in and they just switched off. They didn't even connect through the internet. I mean, I know of churches that simply closed completely down and had nothing. I don't know anything about, or maybe not an Orthodox church, but I do know of churches that did that. They just turned off. There wasn't even an online, anything going on. And so, a lot of people left religion as a result of this. But then I think there was also a group of people that said, what am I doing? What is life really like? Can I take this anymore? And and now I've read probably, I don't know, dozens and dozens at least of articles, watched numerous videos, that I can very, very safely and confidently say to everybody, this is not just happening for the Orthodox.
Mhm. See,
There are a
that's
lot of,
all. Yeah, sorry for interrupting. I would
yeah.
say though that while and you and I will get onto this in a few minutes. That is the recent survey undertaken by the UK Bible Society.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Shows us some stats that pertain across the Christian community.
Oh, yes.
But um, if I think back to my own deeper encounter with Orthodoxy in the early 1990s, it does seem to me that there are commonalities between what we're observing now in terms of the questions people are bringing with them as they enter the church and the ones that I was witnessing at that time. So, for example, I was working in a bookshop, albeit an Anglican one in Montreal, from I think it was 94 to 97, but the manager was Orthodox.
Mhm.
And so most of our materials were Orthodox. We had everything from St. Vlad's and from Ancient Faith's own predecessor, Conciliar Press, and the whole spectrum. And it meant that we were attracting a lot of inquirer footfall and the constituency of people that were coming forward to speak with the manager about sort of what books they should buy and, actually seeking spiritual counsel was very similar to the constituency that we're
Yeah.
encountering now.
Yeah.
And it struck me then, I used to call it, because Montreal's history is largely French Catholic, it struck me as being sort of a subversive, in a positive way, a subversive evangelical presence, that Orthodoxy represented there. And I wondered what that was about. And so while you speak of the pandemic, and there's no doubt in my mind that much of what you have just said is both right and on to something bigger. There's also a thread in the movement towards orthodoxy that is particular to orthodoxy and that
Yes,
distinguishes it.
absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that um, one of the things that I've noticed in a lot of the conversation about these, as Justin Brierley from there in the UK calls it, the surprising rebirth of belief in God, which is a very kind of long and clunky title, but it does exactly what it says on the label. Um, that there is, in many cases, there is this desire for enchantment, a desire for a reconnection with the spiritual world that we can't see. Um, and and so, I mean, certainly the conversation around what's called reenchantment has been going on for many, many decades. And there's like, even scholarly material about this. This is not some brand new thing. But for it to get into a more popular experience, that is something that, at least now that there's a wave of that, and certainly, there have been other waves of it. Um, but I think that one of the things that what it is that Orthodox Christianity has that, frankly, most other Christian groups do not, is that while we're all sort of talking now about reenchantment, and it's funny, I mean, I remember even just like 10, 15 years ago, if I use that term, you get weird looks from people like, enchanters, magic, you know, fantasy, like that, right? But now it's people are kind of ready to go with this language, which is beautiful. I think, I feel like, okay, our moment has arrived on some level. But while everyone's having this conversation and saying, okay, how can we tap into this? How can we help people see the world differently? What Orthodox Christianity has, not because it's trying to come up with a response for this, it's just our nature, is the unseen is made seen very explicitly by how we, not just the way we talk, absolutely in the way we talk, but the way that we worship, the way our churches are built. Uh, talk like we don't have to come up with a conversation about angels and demons. It's all there in our church services. It's all there in our iconography. It's all there in our architecture. It's everywhere in our tradition already, just waiting for people to come and discover it, right? And plug into it. What has been implicit for many people, and they're trying to still drag out of the implicit, for us has been explicit forever. Like, it's always been this way. Our ritual life not only helps people to see the world differently, which is a lot of the conversations about seeing the world differently, which is fine. I mean, that's good, but also to engage with the unseen world in a healthy way,
Mhm.
right? It's not just a conversation. And I think that for those that they just leave it there, um, they're kind of promoting book clubs,
Mhm.
which I love a good book club. I love a good conversation. I basically talk for a living now. But I always try to aim my talk towards the 3D life. And that is what we have. And I think this is one of the reasons why I don't know to what extent. I haven't looked at the figures as clearly as much, but I know that the religious groups that are benefiting from what is happening now, largely speaking, are more conservative. Although not only, I mean, like there's been an uptick in attendance in the Church of England.
Mhm.
There's been an uptick of attendance in, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland.
Right.
Uh, these are not conservative church bodies by any stretch of the imagination, right? But it's those that are especially taking the unseen spiritual world much more seriously. So traditional Catholics are also seeing this. Pentecostals, frankly, are also seeing this, even though their approach to the unseen spiritual world is very, very different from ours. Um, so I think that's the commonality. And if I may say so, as an evangelist, um, Orthodox Christianity has it all ready for you.
Mhm.
It's simply there. There doesn't need to be any kind of reorienting or retooling or reform. We just have to have the courage to present it to people and say, yeah, this is what we're about, and
Yeah, I
always
think
have.
I mean, there's something deeply resonant in what you've just said. I saw a tweet a couple of days ago by an Anglican social media person whose tweets I often appreciate because they're quite sound, they're quite thoughtful. And he said something about sort of this evangelical moment from his perspective, and he was talking about the need for Anglicans to be very clear about their traditional doctrine, because, in fact, in terms of their formularies, they're not at all the liberal body that they appear to be in terms of the way
Yes, right.
they're
Yeah,
manifest in society today. And, I just tweeted back something to the effect of, yes, you're absolutely right, but you also need to take more seriously your own liturgical life because at its best, the Book of Common Prayer uh, brushes up against orthodoxy in the sense that it's got a ritual and a ritual language that is expressive of that divine or that spiritual reality. And
yeah,
he responded very well to that. But I think, yeah, that inherent relationship between what it is we believe and how it is we go about that belief, i.e., in the
yeah,
liturgical.
yeah. I mean, the West has for so long been so intellectualized,
Mm,
that I mean, and I mean, I have nothing wrong with intellectual life. I mean, I'm just about to finish my, with God's help, my second master's degree. I have, lots and lots of books with words that are bigger than I should be saying, but we've so long been about beliefs that, what it is that worship is, how it works, what it does to the worshiper has become a secondary or tertiary even consideration. I mean, in my opinion, this is part of why, to wax decidedly non-ecumenical for a moment, in my opinion, this is part of why, what happened to Roman Catholic worship happened,
mhm,
is that it became regarded as a secondary thing, and yeah, and so, even particularly you can see in the like the low church evangelical world, they'll very, very confidently say things like, well, there are different tastes, different styles of worship, all this kind of stuff. But we can't think that doesn't have an effect
mhm.
on the actual Christian, a transformative effect on the actual Christian. If you say, well, there's just different styles and different tastes, then what you're saying is that the way that you worship does not actually matter. What really matters is probably what you believe and maybe what you feel.
Mm,
But human beings, I mean, that's the historical aberration. Human beings throughout all of history, Christian and non-Christian, have regarded worship as doing something to you. And so if you're doing something different in worship, you're doing something else to the worshiper,
right.
you know?
Yeah, I think, if we were to do some kind of study on mission and worship, it would be interesting to start, particularly after the Second World War, and bring it up to
Mm,
the present and look at how things have evolved, stroke devolved, since that moment,
yeah,
and then account somehow for the the social effect that it's had, and
yeah.
equally the effect that it's had on those approaching the Christian faith. Years ago, there was a film by a German director, translated into English as "Into Great Silence,"
Mm,
and well, you probably know then that it looked at the monks of the Grande Chartreuse in France, which is uh, a strictly observant Benedictine order.
Yeah.
And the director was not allowed. It took 10 years for him to get permission from the abbot to film this documentary film. And when he finally got the permission, he was not permitted to use any additional sound equipment or lighting equipment other than that which was already attached to the camera. And so the film is by and large silent, other than the soundscape of the monks' worship. And when I saw that film in the cinema, I came out thinking, there's so often so much buzz, so much conversation around what the Catholic Church believes. And of course, what comes to people's minds is sort of its polemical assertions in the popular media, about abortion, about birth control, about really its moral framework. And without saying anything about the content of that moral framework, it is the very thing that meant people had a hard time, I think, approaching the church. Whereas, of course, what's a person's common conception about a mystical tradition such as Buddhism, but a smiling Dalai Lama or saffron-robed monks with shaved heads, sitting cross-legged in peace. I bet if they were to study the moral framework of traditional Buddhism, they would find it's not that much different.
Yeah.
The comparison would be, I've got a host of children of my own, and most of them are boys, and they like their cars. And when they see cars on the street, I think the analogy would be that rather than seeing the beauty of the lines that initially appeal to a boy who likes that sort of thing, running straight towards the hood of the car, lifting it up and checking the condition of the wires and thinking about the engineering. That has its place, clearly, or the car wouldn't run. But actually, it's not helpful to keep the bonnet open and to only ever be presenting what's under it. Rather, allow the lines to speak for themselves, allow the car to be a car. And I think that in many ways, Orthodoxy has avoided the trap of the Western intellectual trap of
Yeah.
sort of spilling its guts before people even get a
Yeah.
chance to approach it.
Yeah. I mean, I think so on one level, I think that is true. And this gets into, a significant piece of what our conversation that you said you wanted to have was about, which is this question of catechism, right? So there's a bunch of people showing up at our doors that we didn't do anything to bring them there, except continue to be ourselves. But of course, there's a push going on external to us, and I think number one, of course, we have to take note of what that push consists of, so that we can at least begin to understand those who are coming. So I think that because I don't think Orthodox Christianity needs reform. I don't think it needs reform,
Mhm.
but I think Orthodox Christians need reform. And one of the reforms that I think we need is to make this tradition that we have, that is from God, that is, through the apostles, that is through the prophets, that is through all the saints. Uh, we don't need to alter it in any way, but we do need to help people access it. Right. And so, I mean, in many cases right now, of course, step one has been taken for us. People are just showing up, and thank God for that. But in terms of the way that we teach people how to become not just part of our parish communities, but grounded in them and planted in them, so that this is where they are for the rest of their life. My sense is that largely we're doing pretty badly.
Mhm.
And on the one hand, I know, for instance, in many traditionally Orthodox countries, there is no catechism at all.
Mhm.
Or in places where, for instance, where the country may not be Orthodox, but the Orthodox minority present is just used to serving a particular ethnic group that are a minority there, that there's no catechism at all. And that then spills over. Like, for instance, I have a cousin, I won't say where exactly because I don't want to out this person, but I have a cousin who lives in Eastern Europe, and um, she told me she was going to become Orthodox, which I was shocked and just happy about this and so forth, you know. Um, and she said, "Yeah, I called a local parish and they scheduled my baptism for next week." And I was like, "Have you been taking classes or you know?" And it turns out no. You know, it was a very kind of, I mean, it was built on a long experience of visiting Orthodox churches and you know, just to go in and pray and light a candle or something like that. But there was no catechism. There was no real preparation. There was no integration in the community. It was just like, okay, you'd like to be Orthodox? All right, we'll put that on the schedule for next week. And so I was, you know, mildly horrified and tried to do what I could to try to connect her to resources in her own language and try to find communities that maybe were doing something to connect to people of her culture. Um, so on the one hand, you have that, this sort of no catechism approach. And I'm not saying in that particular country that there's no catechism happening, but at least in the parish she called, they didn't see any, it didn't even occur to them. You know, they just said, oh yeah, sure, come on, you know, which I'm very happy for the welcome that she received. That's great. But uh, and then you know, here in the much more kind of activist and engaged and uh, conversational and teachy West, um, our approach to catechism has largely been what I call Orthodoxy 101.
Mm.
Now, I know that some parishes, they title their catechism that, and I'm not criticizing any particular parish's program at all, because people might mean different things by that. But what I mean by that is that we teach it as a kind of academic class
Mhm.
where you come out the other end knowing facts about the Orthodox Church, right? The kind of thing that is wonderfully summarized in Metropolitan Kallistos Ware's book, The Orthodox Church.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a great book. It does its job extremely well. Um, you know, it even breaks out of the mold of being a kind of textbook, but in its basic essence, that's still what it is it's information about Orthodoxy. You know, our list of our doctrines, our history, you know, the contents of the ecumenical councils, geography, structure, all these kinds of things. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think that all of this is very, very important and should be included in catechism on some level. On some level. Um, it might even be just simply the level of giving everyone a copy of that book and saying, read it, please. You know, if you have any questions, you know, please address them. But what I think is that if that's what we do, if that's all we do for catechism, we will probably get hold of people for whom that kind of intellectual learning is attractive
Mm.
and they can connect with that the rest of their life. But most people, that is not where they live. It's just not where they live. It's not day-to-day life, right? And so, I mean, I've traveled a lot this last several months and over the last several years, visiting many, many parishes, you know, largely to give lectures and so forth, but having many conversations with parish priests and with parishioners and meeting new converts and all this kind of stuff. And I had a moment during one of my visits earlier this year where the priest and the pastor and then his assistant pastor, and actually I think there were a couple of other priests in the room that were attached as well to that church. They asked me, you know, what are you seeing in various churches as you visit them? What are people doing in terms of catechism? You know, what's your sense of what's going on? You know, and it occurred to me then to ask the priest. I said, I want you to imagine, Father, in your head, your best parishioners, like the ones that are ideal. They're doing all the things that you preach about. They're following the instructions you give in confession. You know, they are listening to your counsel. They are taking the actions that you have said, right? Now imagine that person, you know, all of their features and so forth. And I said, now, is that what you're teaching in catechism? Is that what you're teaching? Are you teaching them to be like that? And at that point, the priest looks over at his assistant pastor and goes, huh, which, you know, says to me, I mean, I'm sure in very good faith and probably with a lot of acumen, you know, they've been teaching all of these good things. I mean, these are good things. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that people should not know the content of the ecumenical councils. Absolutely. If you have the capability of understanding what's in the councils, you should. But it is also the case, it is undeniable that the path to the kingdom of heaven
Mm.
does not require that kind of knowledge. It doesn't.
No,
You
you're
know,
absolutely right. And I guess one of the things that, because, I myself run an online catechism, and I suppose it would be guilty, although I make it very, very clear from the beginning that ultimately the Orthodox life is not what we're about to explore. And I try to repeat that as we go through the
yeah.
material. I teach the material because I love it and it's interesting, but constantly with reference back to what you've just said.
Yeah. I
Except,
mean, I've done the Orthodoxy 101 thing. I mean, for most of the years that I was pastoring, that's what I did
right.
because that's that's what I had received, and that's what everybody else was doing.
Mm,
You know, but I think that I have come to the conclusion that catechism should be much more like job training than it is like an academic class. Um, it's interesting. You say, you tell people like, okay, the real life is this. This is, and I know about another priest who apparently what he would always say, okay, now in this class you're going to learn about the Orthodox life. You're not going to learn the Orthodox life. And I mean, on the one level, like that's great, right? But if you're particularly, it would be hard to do probably with online catechism, but with in-person catechism, there's no reason that you have to just live with that tension. You know,
mhm,
people like me who work on the internet largely and talk into cameras and microphones and write stuff and so forth. The best that I can ever offer anyone is a supplement,
mm,
right? The best that I can offer them is to point at the thing that they should be doing. But a parish priest, a parish catechist, a godparent, what they can offer is, okay, here's how you do this. Number one, let's stand in front of the icons. This is how you make the sign of the cross. This is how you bow. This is how you get up in the morning and say your prayers, especially on the days when you don't feel like it. Like right now, you're brand new. Welcome. You're very happy to do this every day. But eventually, a year or two down the line, you're going to kind of go every so often, maybe most days, um, you know, and here's how you here's how you meditate.
mm,
Okay, now everybody, let's do this together. We're going to turn the lights down, maybe light one candle, and one person is going to repeat the Jesus prayer. And all the rest of us are going to attempt the extremely difficult practice of listening to no other thought than this one person's voice. Let's just try that for 5 minutes, right? You can't do that, right? You can't do that on over Zoom, really.
right.
There's no way to make that work, right? Um, let's sit down and look at your finances and figure out the way that's practical and good for you to use your money for the kingdom of God. All of these things that are the practical life, again, like the good parishioner, the ideal parishioner, like the way, how do they live? What are they doing in the parish? How are they engaging with parish life? What are they doing outside the parish? What do you do when you're trying to do prayers together as a family and you've got a 2-year-old who will not sit still? Like, do you make him sit down? Do you let him run around at your feet? All of these things that, sure, we can talk about, but when you've got a dad or a mom there who you watch her go in and out of the service over and over and over and over and over and over again. And she's then talking about how much she loves being an Orthodox Christian. And here's what we do with our kids. That is a powerful kind of catechism that you cannot give with a screen or with a microphone or, okay, everybody, welcome to our class. This is the formation. And it's interesting to me, like, if you look at um, catechetical lectures from the early church, or like the Didache, the earliest known kind of catechetical text, most of what they're about in many cases is how to live the right way, like moral living, which is completely understandable in the context, which is okay, they're talking to people who last week were pagans, who last week, the idea of not having sexual elements in their religious practice, that would have been weird. Like, of course, that's what everyone does. That's part of our spiritual experience, the idea of that. Oh, by the way, women are people too. Kids are people too. That's crazy to pagans, right? So it makes sense that that would be the way that the catechism went in the early church. And then also, a lot of the instruction was, for instance, okay, this is what baptism is and does to you, for instance, this is what the divine liturgy is and does to you. It's really much more this kind of 3D life. A lot of what we think of as catechism now is a result of debates that occurred because of heresies that grew up, which it's important that we know what the church teaches about these things. That's absolutely important. But knowing that stuff is not the core of the Christian life. The core of the Christian life is faithfulness. And I've been thinking a lot about, like, okay, well, what do we do then? What is all this? Where does all this lead? And I mean, the conclusion I've come to, and I'm still working out my thoughts about this. I'm still having conversations with people about this. This is my task, is to chat with people. But I think that one of the things that's often missing is when people show up at our doors, we often assume that they know the gospel, that they've been convinced of the gospel, and they may not be. They might not know it at all, or they might be convinced by some other gospel or some version of it that's off. So I think that number one is that people need to be evangelized, that they need to have the gospel preached to them when they first come.
Before you go on, I think that naturally leads me into something I wanted to present to you, because everything you've just said about catechesis, I find actually quite invigorating. I can see how I would implement something like that where, in my context. And it makes me think of catechesis then in really three parts, the bulk of which would be what I'll call part two, which is everything you've just described. Part one being the Orthodoxy 101 thing, just so that people know what it is they're encountering in the first place, and then the what, the content of what it is they're encountering. But then the third is one that I see in far too many instances being neglected, and that is the pastoral catechesis, by which I mean fundamentally just good pastoral care, incarnational pastoral care, where the priest is present not simply as a liturgy machine, not simply as a director of feast days or whatever, but rather somebody who is present with people in the midst of their own existential questions and crises. And that I do find sorely lacking. It's certainly something I've seen gravely lacking in other communities, but it hurts when I see it lacking in Orthodox communities.
Yeah.
And I suppose one step, the initial step to addressing that need, is to make sure people are well grounded in the gospel, because of course the incarnate Logos, Jesus Christ, is the supreme sort of pastor and is the supreme answer to any existential question.
Yeah.
But of course, the priest needs to substantiate that in his ministry, and not the priest alone, but we're talking, here about, the church's structure.
Yeah. I mean, that's tough too, because in many cases, like, here in America, there are parishes where the priest knows everybody.
Mm.
But there are parishes which have hundreds and hundreds of families. Like, I was at a parish where I think they said they had 500 families. So that means that's about 1,500 people, more or less. And they said, we're so blessed we have 4 priests here. And I said, I mean, that's great that you have 4 priests, but like if you're familiar with what they call the Dunbar number, which is that any one person can maintain about 150 relationships in their life, some obviously more intimate than others. Then I said, well, you need 10 priests for this parish, and assuming that these are the only relationships that they have, and you would need to divide people up. I mean, and how many of those people, even with 4 priests, right? This parish that felt like they had a lot. How many of those people is one of those priests actually somebody's spiritual father? And, the majority probably no, like what would those 4 priests do if they were actually hearing 1,500 confessions a year, saying people go to confession only once a year? Or what if they were going on a much more regular basis that could balloon up to 6, 12, 20,000 confessions a year? What would they do, right? So obviously that's a supreme lack of coverage. And the fact that we have a clergy shortage going on here in America, I mean, that's an extreme example, but the fact that we have this clergy shortage going on makes this all even harder. But also there is a problem, which is that in our isolationist digital age, the temptation for the priest himself to just do his job and not really be someone who's present with people, that temptation has increased. And now, of course, we're ordaining millennials, right? So people who were born in the 1990s, and they grew up with social media. They grew up with a lot of these things that are the factors that are kind of drawing us into ourselves and away from other people. And I think that we're going to need to learn an ascetical engagement with our digital world if we're going to just minister to people. And I mean, I can speak, from my own experience, right? After stepping aside as a pastor, that actually came with a whole new set of temptations, which is, oh, I don't have to deal with people anymore, which is garbage. That's not true. I'm still a priest, I'm still a human, right? But I'm a priest, and so I have a duty to people, even if it's not even if I'm not sort of on staff, at the parish. I still have a duty to people. If I want to continue to be a priest, then I still have to serve them in this particular way. But it's an ascetical struggle in our age that I'm not going to say it's radically different from previous ages, but it has a particular character in our time. Many saints have talked about the problem of distraction. Our set of distraction is very thoroughgoing and very pervasive. So I think that you're absolutely right that there needs to be this, but also that someone might, in this parish with hundreds and hundreds of families, the priest might just throw up his hands and say, it's impossible for me to be present with everybody. It's all I can do to keep this place together. I'm hearing as many confessions as I can. I'm doing as much as I can. We're all doing as much as we can here. And I think that one of the things that we, at least here in the West, need to do, I mean, I don't know about in Orthodox countries what they do about this, but I think that one of the things that we can do is we need to get away from a clericalist model in which all the ministry has to be done by this one guy.
I am so glad to hear you say that.
I mean, obviously I'm putting it in extreme terms. Certainly every parish has people in it who are not the priest, not the deacon, who are doing, although I think most parishes need to have multiple deacons. I think most parishes should have multiple deacons, because honestly, this is what the apostles made deacons for, to help run things. That's what they're for. It's beautiful what they do liturgically. Absolutely. We should have that, but they were appointed to help run things. So there are people doing ministry, but often there is still this clericalist assumption that many people have, including the clergy. We have it like, oh, I have to get all of this done. I several years ago, I read an article from a bishop in which he was talking about his philosophy of management, I think is what the term he was talking about, but really ministry. And he said, look, even in a parish that's kind of an ideal size where the priest can know everybody, the truth is he's still not going to touch everybody on the same level. It's just the reality. Anyone who's been a parish priest completely knows that. There are some people you can connect with more, and it's not just because you like them better, although honestly, there are people in our parishes we like better than other people. But we minister to all of them, but you're not going to be able to minister to all of them at the same level. And a lot of it is because even if there aren't too many people, right, which is the problem in many places, but even if there aren't too many people, a lot of people don't want it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want it, or they're so unused to it, they don't even know that they should want it, right? They don't even know that they're missing it. And so what this in this article this bishop was saying is, he said, look, it's my duty to minister to everyone. Absolutely, I have to minister to everyone. But if you look at the model that Jesus practiced when he was in his earthly ministry, he served everyone who came to him, but he focused on 12 guys. And those 12 guys turned the world upside down, right? And we see that model replicates, right? So the bishop is the pastor, but he can't be everywhere. And so he ministers especially to his clergy, who then minister to others, who then minister to others. And even, this is not just a practical consideration, right? This is the way that the cosmos is set up. This is the way that God created the whole world. Is he created it, even though God is perfectly capable of ministering to everything and maintaining everything, with no effort, right? There's no effort on the part of God. He doesn't have to go, boy, that was a lot today. A lot of prayers today, a lot of maintaining of, volcanoes and ocean currents and stuff. No, it's not like that. He's absolutely omnicapable, omnipotent, whatever. But out of his love, he shares all of that with the angels, with the saints, with us, and when I actually began to, during my pastoral experience, when I actually began to practice that to some extent, number one, my stress level went way down. It was really a beautiful, beautiful thing. But I also noticed actually that it benefited the whole parish, because there were people standing there with their hands open, and I was just giving them a little something because I was giving everybody a little something. And when I realized, okay, there's some people don't even want that little something, and I put more into the hands of those people who had their hands out, they were able to benefit a lot more people, and it worked better. And I think that that's one of the things that in this moment of the inquirer and convert surge that we need to think a lot about is that many people who are coming are feeling lonely and looking for community. And you might say, oh, well, that's not the reason you should come. Fine. I don't care too much the reason that people came, as long as they know why it is that you should be part of the church, which is you're here for Jesus Christ. You're here to be part of his body. That's whatever got you to the door. Great.
It is
but here's what we do.
It is interesting, though, in that regard, that the interview that Justin Brierley did with Rhiannon McAleer from the Bible Society, she said that the survey showed up precisely that many of the young men in particular who are approaching the church are not doing so out of sort of a need for community or out of their self-perceived need for community, but rather because of an act of an ignited belief. Now that's quite interesting because it's different than what has motivated people in other points.
Yes. So I cannot speak for women, but I've had women speak to me, and what they often tell me, or what I hear from them, particularly as they're becoming part of our parishes, or as they don't want to become part of our parishes, is that the reason that they chose to become part of the parish is because they met the people there and felt like they could live with these people. And so I think that what motivates men and women often can be different. Or I should say on the flip side, I've known some, they're like, oh, I like this Orthodoxy thing, but these people, I cannot be here.
Mm.
You know, the way that these people look at my kids, for instance, when they're making too much noise, you know, that drives people away. Um, Particularly, you know, families with children, particularly women, I think. That's what they've told me.
Mhm.
Men are more likely to come in with a sense of, wow, this is right. This is the
Right.
correct thing. This is, you know, I'm standing up for something by doing this. You know, whatever. Um, and that is often what motivates people to come in. But that sense of rightness is hard to sustain throughout your whole life,
Mhm.
right? I mean, when you're a young man, you can feed off of that for a while, but um, I mean, my experience has been, you know, now that I'm firmly middle aged and I have 4 children, is that what keeps you there is that this is a place where you and your family can live, and which binds you together and guides you day to day. You know, it's a way of living, right? I mean, it's, you know, in some ways, I know that men particularly, we can connect with military imagery and metaphors and so forth. You know, we're fighting the good fight, all this kind of stuff. And so, like, you think about when someone joins the military, like there's a here in the U.S. There's a recruiting slogan that the Marines have used for years now. The few, the proud, the Marines,
Mm.
right? Like, what does that say to you? Like, wow, I'm part of an elite group. I'm tough, you know, all that kind of stuff. And but so that gets you in the door, right? I want to be part of the few, the proud, the Marines. But then when you're there and you're going to boot camp, um, you're learning, wow, this is going to change me
Mm.
into someone else, right? And the ones that go that you know dig into that change, those are the ones who make it. But there are people who leave like, oh wow, I wanted to be part of the few, the proud, but I didn't want to become something else. You know, um, so I think that that's part of what it needs to be is that for men it's a sense of, okay, I'm here, but now what am I being trained to become? How am I being transformed? How am I being strengthened, and so that I can deal with what's coming at me day to day, you know. Um, so yeah, different people have different motivations for why they show up at the door, and even maybe why they're, you know, go through catechesis or whatever. But I think that the training has to be um, much more practical in catechesis. I'm not saying it has to be exclusively that kind of thing. Like, we don't need to take an anti-intellectual approach.
Mhm.
Absolutely not. But we do need to take a much more kind of whole person approach. And we're not trying to train people to, you know, pass a class, a freshman level class in Orthodox Christianity as a religion. That's not what we're doing. And I mean, I think like areas that I think are often lacking, and I know it's not everywhere because I've seen some catechetical programs that are including this stuff, but I think that areas that are lacking is, you know, as I said, you know, number one, we need to preach the gospel to people so they know, like, okay, this is the basic frame of this story that you're entering into,
Mm.
right? But there needs to be a lot more instruction in scripture. At least here in the U.S., we kind of a lot of our converts are former Protestants, particularly former evangelical Protestants, and we're just sort of piggybacking on the Bible training that they received, you know, in the 80s. Well, guess what? Evangelicalism has moved on from that level of scriptural knowledge.
Mm.
And so now even people who are former evangelicals don't have it. They don't even know the basic stories of the Bible. And um, we should have been teaching this all along because, of course, our interpretation of the scripture is very different from theirs in many cases. But also, there are many people now being raised with no religion at all. I meet more and more people. Like, initially, what I was hearing 15, 20 years ago, I would meet people and say, oh, yeah, I remember when I was little, my parents took me to church and then we kind of stopped. And now I'm just hearing more and more, oh, no, my family never went. We never did. Because, you know, the statistics are very clear. The rise of the unaffiliated, the rise of the nuns, you know, NONES. We always have to spell it out because we don't want to say we're talking about nuns. You know, um, and so more and more people do not even know the stories of the Bible, just the stories of the Bible, right? And I also think that catechism should include lives of saints. Parish priests, preachers, we stand up and say, oh, you should read the lives of the saints. You should read the lives of the saints. Okay, But when you're just being told, read the lives of the saints,
Mm.
and you've never had anyone read the life of the saint to you, you may not know how amazing these stories are
Mm.
and why you should want to get into this, why you should want to read it out loud to your kids. Um, I mean, liturgically, lives of saints are read out loud in services traditionally. Almost no parish is doing that now. You can hear it in an abbreviated form in a lot of monasteries. But like it used to be, there were long saints' lives read during matins. You know, and it was so important that there are actually some. I was told this by a Russian Orthodox deacon. He was telling me, I think it was a saint named Averkios, I think that's the name, where the saint of the day, this was the saint of the day, and there was appointed supposed to be a reading of his life, but there was no knowledge, no information about him.
Mm.
All that was remembered about him was his name. Maybe there was a martyr or something like that. And so this was such an important thing to be included that uh, it was appointed to certain writers to create from the whole cloth
Mm.
a life of this saint so that it could be read during this service. And it was kind of a pastiche of other stuff, so it would sound pretty much like other things. But the idea is that this story is so important to be part of the Christian's life that it's going to get read out loud in church, even if we have to make something up. Because saints' lives were never about like, okay, here's the historical account of this person. That's an element of it, but it was because this is actually needed for our lives. And what saints' lives do is it gives us, like when you're in a moment and you have to choose, you can think, oh, what did St. George do when he confronted this dragon? What did, what did the Apostle Paul do when he had to deal with this? Right? Those are the things we remember. We pattern ourselves off of these stories.
It raises, though, a question in my mind, and that is like, because you mentioned, encouraging the reading of scripture, and now you're mentioning the lives of saints, all of which I buy into without a moment's hesitation. But I know that even having lived an academic life, I would feel wholly under-equipped. When I read the scriptures, I read them with the church very deliberately, and I seek to contemplate meaning as faithfully as I can. But I do that almost scrupulously because I feel under-equipped to deviate one iota, because I come from a different sort of more historical critical training, and
Sure.
none of that helps when it comes to instructing the soul in growth in the spirit. I have learned more by listening to you and Father Stephen on Lord of Spirits when it comes to talking and thinking about scriptures than probably ever before. Having said that, where it sort of ventures onto my supposed turf would be when it comes to lives of saints. And you know that when you and I first met, I mean, I could rattle off anything you wanted to know about St. Theodore of Tarsus. I could tell you the facts about what happened here or what happened there in Wales or elsewhere in the British Isles. But it took sort of a conversion of heart in order to actually get my head round the true meaning of this stuff for the Christian. And if I needed to have that reawakened within me, how much more do the faithful actually need initial instruction before they can even get into the lives of the saints, lest they be left incredulous or by these seemingly fantastical stories.
Yeah. We do have this problem now, right? I'm actually working on. I've just started writing a new book, and well, depending on who listens to this, some people will now know about it. But the book that I'm working on is the working title is The Book of Dragons and Saints. So I'm taking this on. I'm taking this head on.
Good. I
Actually,
already like it. Go on.
yeah. And the point of it is to take saints' lives that include dragons in one way or another. Whether it's a big part of the story or maybe just a moment in the story, and to tell those stories in a way that is kind of in a sort of epic, legendary tone, which in many cases is the tone in which these saints' lives were originally told, in what was appropriate to their time and place, right? And then I have a frame narrative that I'm using to kind of put it all together. So there's a certain level of fictionalization that I'm introducing into this, but it'll actually be relatively minimal, as I've conceived of it. And one of the points that I've already written the preface, which, you know, they say you should not write the preface before you've got the book written. But part of why I do that is because it's laying out for me, and I can revise it if I have to. It's laying out for me sort of the theory of the book, like what is it I'm trying to accomplish with this, you know? And one of the things that I say in my current draft of the preface is that the facts, the historical facts of a saint's life, while very interesting and important, are never what saints' lives were about.
Mm.
It's never what their purpose was, which is why, as I said, you can have one that's completely fictional, you know, that gets slotted into the slot. And no one thought that they were lying about anything. You know, that's not what was going on. Like a classic example, of course, is St. George. The sort of germ, as it were, of the life of St. George, there's not a lot of detail there, actually. But then now there are all of these stories connected with St. George that have accumulated over the years. And certainly someone might, you know, a kind of rigorist or, I don't know, fundamentalist maybe might say, oh, all of that is exactly what happened in his life. And like, this is all just historical accounts and so forth. And then you'd have to ask, well, why is it that some of them contradict each other? But that was never the point. We were never supposed to read saints' lives the way that Ken Ham reads Genesis. You know? And people who know who that is, you know what I mean? You know, we were never, it was never supposed to be read in terms of this kind of empiricist approach to things. That's not their point. You know, and no one's pulling a fast one by writing them the way that they do. The point of saints' lives is, how does this story function in the life of the Christian? It is fundamentally a phenomenological phenomenon. You know, that is its point. Is it's supposed to give you an image of how to live.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to give you an image that can inspire you, right, to be this way, right? You know, everything in the Christian life. I mean, Saint John Chrysostom says at one point that everything that Christ did was for the purpose of making men like to angels. You know, everything. So it's all about our transformation in Christ. That's what it's aimed at. All of this work that Christ did and that continues to happen, that he continues to do through his saints. And so if I were going to say, okay, we're going to, you know, gather together for, I know one parish, they have what they call Orthodox story time, and it's aimed at kids, which is good because kids are often a good place, you know, to begin with this stuff. But I don't know. I think it might be good for a lot of parishes to have Orthodox story time. Maybe we call it something different for adults. And I might say, okay, some of you might say to yourself, did that really happen? And okay, I understand that's an important question, right? But ask yourself this question. When you hear the story in the Gospels of the 10 lepers and how there's, you know, Jesus heals 10 lepers, 9 go their way, 1 comes back to give thanks to the Lord. Did it ever occur to you to say, well, what were all their names? If it never occurred to you to say that, then you have received this story the way that you're supposed to receive it. This is not a story about a list of 10 guys and here's who they were and where they were from and all this kind of stuff. This is a story about gratitude and about the healing power of Christ and so forth. That's what's going on in this. And by no means am I saying that there's anything unhistorical, as the way we think of it now, in that. But we have an innate sense of the way to receive stories that often our minds tell us is wrong, but we still get it. So, you know, I would say to someone, look, if it helps you to think of this as a fictional story, go for it. I don't care whether you think it's fiction or not, because that's not the point of this story. You know, that's not a question that the people who put this story together were asking, is this fact or fiction? Because that distinction would have made no sense in this genre at all. You know, I think that there is a way, like there's a beautiful moment. I mean, I think this can be part of our catechetical consciousness, more broadly speaking. There's a beautiful moment that's opened up, I think, for Orthodox storytelling right now. And if we can figure out a way to write these stories and tell these stories, they're going to make people want to engage with it and connect with it, then this can also contribute to this project of not just attracting people to the Orthodox Church, but making sure that they are firmly grounded and planted once they get here. And this book that I'm working on is a kind of experiment in that. And thank God I have people who want to help me experiment. So we'll see if it works.
It almost certainly will, as long as you remember to include St. Tylo and St. Samson.
Absolutely, they are on my list already.
Good.
So yes, I may be hitting you up actually for some source material or whatever. And one of the things I plan to do for the people who want the what some academics call the underwear of the book, all of the notes, is the back of the book is gonna have notes for every single story saying, this is where I got the core of this material. This is why I added this or that in, this kind of stuff. And like, I'm going to be including some biblical saints. So since I'm giving spoilers here, my first story is going to be about Jonah. Because there are traditions about that sea monster that it's essentially Leviathan. And one of the things I'm doing to kind of stitch the story together and make it work as a unitary whole is I'm taking legends from Jewish midrash about Jonah and about his childhood and so forth, and I'm kind of weaving that together. But I'm saying, like, okay, this is legendary material. I'm not telling you this is the real story of Jonah in any kind of historical critical sense. That's not the point at all. So yeah, or for instance, one of my favorite bits from what we like to call the director's cut of the Old Testament, Bel and the dragon from the longer version of Daniel, right? I mean, there's a dragon in there, and that Bel is actually Baal. But even though the Orthodox have this in our Bibles, a lot of people don't know that story. So I'm going to tell that one. I mean, what an amazing story! I mean, he literally makes this dragon explode from the inside out by feeding it explosives. You know. I mean, who wouldn't want to hear that story, So there's going to be so much fun stuff. And my big climax currently that I'm planning is, of course, going to involve St. George. And it, of course, is going to involve the Archangel Michael. Right. And then there will be a big banquet at the end. So that's my current plan for this thing. But I think that when people can live in this world where there are dragons and saints, where it's not just here's a list of things that I believe, but this is the imaginary, meaning these are all the things that I can think about and the world in which I move and the cultural language that I'm speaking. When we have all of that, then we are helping to cure the way that the West has perceived religion for a long time.
Yes, I find, everything you've just said extremely helpful for so many reasons. But when I'm preaching in my parish context, when I'm talking to people on an individual basis, because I've suffered through, as we all have, the moment in the beginning of the 20th century when it was all about belief, right? I mean, I believe because I see, which was, the mantra of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, Dawkins and Dennett, etc. And I found that so profoundly unsatisfactory. It got me thinking about, obviously, and this is nothing original, but the distinction between belief and faith. And it seems to me
Sure.
that faith is a lens, at the very least. And it's a lens through which we read the world. And it's taken me a while to foster within myself a renewed lens of faith so that I might actually see the world for what it really is, as opposed to what it appears to be on the surface. And it seems to me that, especially in light of what you've just said, our task when it comes to retention of converts will be speaking as well as teaching
a language of faith, a renewed language of faith that we can perhaps assume, and don't even need to worry if it hasn't taken root. We can perhaps assume a level of belief, but ultimately what we have to be interested in is faith properly understood and fostering that within the incomers.
I can't remember which text it's from now, but I lit upon a quote one time from St. Athanasius, where he says that you cannot possibly understand the teaching of the saints unless you're trying to live their life. And I mean, that hits me. It convicts me, for one thing, but it hits me as deeply true. And so, I mean, what does it mean to look with the eyes of faith on something? It's not just, okay, I have a certain set of presuppositions that I've brought into this, right? It's really faithfulness. You cannot understand the teaching of the saints unless you're trying to live their life. It's not a body of knowledge you can simply master. Christianity really is a skill. It is a skill. All skills, of course, come with a lot of head knowledge. But we live in the age where you can now go onto YouTube and it can teach you how to do all kinds of things with your car. And the reason it can do that is not because it gives you a book to read, but because it shows you. Usually there's some guy sticking his hands down in there and, here's how you do this thing. I think that in this moment when people have been so, intellectualized, so put inside their heads for so long that there's this great saying, I love it, touch grass. Which basically you've been spending way too much time on the internet, go outside, right? Like, well, what do they find outside? Well, God willing, they're going to find the church. They're going to find, someone saying, okay, here's how you do this. Here's how you live this way. And like, you mentioned, for instance, you talked about scripture and, hesitance of teaching scripture. I mean, we're all ignorant of scripture. But that's okay because the church still reads it out loud. And everybody is there to hear it. And yes, some people are going to misunderstand it, even probably the preacher. And that's okay, because we have the context in which it can be lived and understood the right way. So even if maybe the words that you say and maybe the thoughts that someone has are not the right words or thoughts, if the actions that they're doing, because they're in conformity with the whole tradition of the church that is simply being lived in the parish context, if those actions that they're doing are the right actions, then God will look at that and judge it to be righteousness. He's going to, even if you come away with mistaken understandings of things. The essence of heresy is not, I made a mistake. The essence of heresy is, I will continue to make this mistake no matter what correction I receive. Right. It's not that you had a bad thought or said the wrong thing. I like to say, there's a million heresies every Sunday during coffee hour, and maybe even some during the sermon. People are saying all kinds of wrong things, and yet somehow we go on. Somehow we still have an Orthodox Church that's living this faith that we've been living for many centuries upon centuries. And so, I think that I'm profoundly hopeful and even excited about our current moment. Not excited because lots and lots of people are showing up at our doors. I mean, that's cool. Don't get me wrong. That is cool. But I also keep telling myself, look, this is probably not going to last. These things come in waves. I mean, maybe it'll last for decades. Maybe it'll last my whole life. I have no idea. But it's important to begin playing the long game now, so that these people who are coming will want to stay, and also so that the ones of them that are going to be the next generation of clergy and catechists and musicians and iconographers and architects and so forth are being trained well now. It's going to be, especially here in the U.S. where we have this clergy shortage, it's going to be a little painful. And the temptation is going to be, let's build bigger and bigger churches, which, okay, I get it. Like, I was at a church a couple weekends ago. They had built a lovely building, a lovely church that could hold maybe 110, 120 people. They were getting 80 or 90 people on Sunday. So that's good. That's pretty full. That's what you want. And then, boom, they were getting 250 people on Sunday. and people were literally leaving because they could not squeeze into the church.
Mm.
And so they worship in the parish hall, and the church is now the chapel of this parish community, and they're working on building something new. So like I don't blame anyone who says let's build a new church, but don't build something that's going to be full of all the people you have now, and then that you're going to have to sell in 20 years because your finances collapse because you didn't do what was needed to keep these people
Yeah.
and to bring the next generation in, you know? So I think we have a real opportunity. God is giving us a real opportunity to take stock of what we've been doing. You know, in many cases where no catechism has been happening, we can begin now. Or in many cases where catechism has been good, but could be much deeper and much more, you know, thoroughgoing, let's do that. So it's a huge opportunity. And I pray that we don't squander it. And that we, you know, especially we as clergy, it's our job to lead this, but not to do it all.
I am delighted to hear you say these things. Obviously, I asked you if we could talk about this publicly because I think it's a pressing issue. I share your optimism, but I also share with you, I think, a sense of urgency, a sense that, you know, these are things we need to be thinking about now, not 5 and 10 years down the line. My primary concern in the midst of all of this is a pastoral one, insofar as I'm sure yours is as well, and that is just in, you know, we hold a treasure, a pearl of great price, and, you know, if we're to allow others to, you know, reap its benefits, we need to help them see it and embrace it as their own, and yeah, that means it's incumbent on us to be actively engaged with what that means and how we can best go about it. And I think really the means are all in place in a way that I certainly don't remember. I may never have witnessed before. And I'm talking about the pre-evangelists like the Jordan Petersons, the enrichers like you know, the podcasts Ancient Faith offer, including as well, though, Jonathan Pageau's The Symbolic World. All of these things are tools that are helping us address people on a number of levels. And so we are supremely poised to deal with this well, but we have to think together and tackle the challenge together.
Yeah, I've noticed, like one of the things I've noticed, even while we're celebrating this wonderful influx of people, is that not every parish is seeing an influx.
Mm.
And some of it is explainable from like location. Like there are areas where they're economically really struggling, and so it's harder for people. You know, they're losing people generally, but there are some places where, like I know an example where the economy is not great, but there's one parish that's really seeing an influx and one parish that's super not.
Mm.
And what's the difference between them? I mean, it is that one is more ready to welcome these people in whatever way.
Mhm.
You know, you'd have to analyze what that looks like on the ground. So we cannot take any of this for granted. And at the same time, at least from demographic studies that I've seen here in the U.S., even while we're seeing, in many cases, parishes are seeing a big influx of people, and some are having to build new churches, whatever, the overall level of people who report that they are Orthodox Christians is actually holding relatively steady, which means that even as there's this big influx, there's also just as fast group of people leaving, right? So what's happening is a kind of replacement right now. We'll see if that turns into an overall increase, a net increase. I don't know. The important thing is not whether there's a net increase or not, although that is an important thing. But the really important thing is, what do we do with the people that God has brought to us? And will the replacement be a good one? Is it going to be a healthier church? Is it going to be a more serious church? Is it going to be a more dedicated, committed church, a more loving church, that where the community really ministers to each other and loves each other, where people who are in need experience the love of Christ in their communities? where it's not just a bunch of people driving in from the suburbs who all see each other on Sunday and then go home, where they actually are caring for each other. If that's what's going on, then we are doing it right. So it's important to talk about where it's not happening and why it's not happening and what's also happening at the same time as we discuss all of this, because I think that it helps to form our thinking and then, God willing, to form our actions in terms of the ways that, like, why are we losing people at the same rate that we're gaining people? And where are they going? Have we seen them in a long time anyway? Are these people already nominal? I mean, what's going on? But we have to take responsibility for the loss just as much as like we like to take responsibility for the gain. We have to take responsibility for the losses too, and ask, what happened in those previous generations that we failed to keep those people, So there's always a warning edge, I think, to any joyous moment in this life. We also have to say now there's also this edge. So mind, as they say when you're in London and going on the underground, mind the gap. Mind the gap.
That's I think a wonderful final word on the topic, at least for now. Perhaps we will find another thread within it to pick up and discuss at another time. But
Amen.
Thank you so much for this. And
thank you, Father. It's always a joy to talk to you, and I'm grateful for our friendship, our collaboration, and for the journeys that are to come.
Likewise.